can't text GM because I'm driving. Quite likely your vision is a step up on the Great Khan, I'm sure of it. It's, to a certain extent, one might even think, what's the point of even talking about Genghis Khan and all that sort of stuff? You know, his model was, I think, you know, a powerful central sort of force setting all the laws, the great law for the whole wide world. You know, I think Genghis Khan's idea was to go global. Not a bad effort for someone who had like zero power, was just living in the northern steppe, hunting rats to eat at one stage, with no allies, no friends, no nothing. And then he goes on to, you know, create the biggest empire the world has ever seen. No one else has taken both Russia and China and the Middle East. He did. But anyway, having said all that, what's the relevance in chatting about Genghis Khan? Well, it's that bit there that I mentioned, I think, you know, the bit where he and the Khans that came after him, in particular Kublai Khan, in the fact that they took China. You know, and China is up and about again. So, how is it relevant? Well, the Yuan dynasty, the Chinese Yuan dynasty, was actually a Mongolian dynasty. It wasn't a Chinese dynasty, essentially. It was a Mongolian dynasty. The Mongols were in charge of China at that point in time. Kublai Khan was in charge. And in fact, did he start the Forbidden City? That I don't know. I'm pretty sure he might have, you know, because Kublai Khan moved his court, as you might call it, Mongolian-style court, you know, which comprised yurts and lots of drinking, no buildings, you know, tents. Anyway, he moved that to Beijing. You know, to a certain extent, did he sort of establish Beijing as a bit of a capital city? Yeah, a little bit like the Romans, you know, sort of established London and Paris and Vienna and all those places. Did Genghis Khan kind of establish Beijing? Either way, it's Genghis Khan, I think, is relevant again, because his model is one of a super powerful, not a god, but a super powerful, actually extremely secular power on Earth that is a central global power, but virtuous in, you know, creating a great law that everyone in the whole wide world follows. And the idea is, if that central power is strong enough, that central power will prevent wars all around the world. And I think the Khans, you know, the Mongolian Empire, achieved that. You know, all the way from the Pacific Ocean, all the way to the Middle East, and all the way, you know, all of China, all of Southeast Asia, all of the steppe, you know, all of Russia. You know, they controlled the whole thing. All of Afghanistan. You know, nobody else has been able to sort of control all of that before. Afghanistan, that's a hard one to control. And then, you know, the Khans, they went all the way down to, you know, all the old Soviet Union kind of lands, all of Central Asia, all of northern India, you know, which became the Mughals, which is kind of Mongol type peoples, you know, politically, and all the way down to Baghdad, which, yeah, that's a huge part of the earth. And how did and the idea, I think, it might have been a good one, for that to continue. I mean, the Mongols could have kept going straight into Europe. Europe was nothing, you know. But they pulled back. The Golden Horde pulled back after getting as far as Poland, getting us, and they took Hungary, but then they pulled back. There was an unexpected death of one of the Khans. The Khan, the guy. Oh, there goes my phone. The Khan, and that was in charge of the Golden Horde. Because it was kind of 4 different hordes. Hordes is kind of groupings. Anyway. But why is this relevant to today? Why would you even talk about it, Genghis Khan? Is it just all hypothetical, philosophical sort of waste of thread space? Maybe not, because, as I said, and I'm no expert. There we go. I'm no expert. Absolutely not. But I just gather what I can. And the model was this central power, so powerful and strong and willing to do violence, but preferring not to. Willing, if anyone steps out of line, extreme violence, but that's where the peace comes from. So, there's a deal on offer to the entire world. Listen, play by our rules and we'll really look after you. Step out of line and you will not believe the slaughter, So, instances of extreme violence for those who resisted. Resistance is death, but that's the deal. But that's his route to peace. And it worked, the Europeans at the time. Now, this is the idea of having a super strong central lawmaker, okay, which would be the Mongols. Compare that approach to the approach of the Europeans at the same time, where torture and death and war and all that sort of stuff was just a way of life in the 1300s and all that sort of thing. 13th century, 14th century. So the Europeans might say, oh geez, the Mongolians, occasionally they come across a town that has resisted Mongolian law, and they absolutely slaughter everyone, and the pets and the children and the babies. It's just horrendous. We would never do that. But not to that level of violence. But the idea of that was the Mongols were making an example. So they'd kill, 1,000 people, horrendously, shockingly. But then 500 towns and villages and cities in that whole vicinity would fall into line, and the net result was 1,000 people slaughtered horrendously, but 1 million people living in peace. Compare that to the European model, any of the European models, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, and all of them, the Europeans, they had capital punishment as a way of life. The Mongols tended to not like capital punishment. There was no such thing. They were a bit like us. There's a lot about the Mongol Empire that's very similar to the modern secular world, because it was secular as well, the ancient Mongol world, because they considered everything to be under the infinite blue sky, everything, and gods to be man-made essentially, so the Khans would bring in the Jews and the Buddhists and the Christians and the Muslims, and they'd say, listen, all your gods and your beliefs and all that sort of stuff, that's all under the sun. Now, we're above all that, because we're the lawmakers, and you've got all your little gods and all that sort of stuff. We're fine with that, but they're not, they're not up there above the sky. They're under the sky. But where is it relevant? Here's the thing. China is relevant in the world, and is it not the case that the kind of communist China CCP model is that kind of a very strong core of lawmakers, as long as you fall into line with that, there will be peace, and the Uyghurs are not kind of falling in line, so bad things happen. All right, price you pay. You know, like back in the Mongol times, you know, Genghis Khan might have sorted those guys out too. The Khans actually kind of brought the Uyghurs up, I think. You know, Uyghur, that word means kind of the wise ones, the intellectual ones, you know, in Central Asia. So in the Mongol times, they kind of established the Uyghurs as something, because they were the educated ones, the ones that could read. They had a real role. Anyway, that aside, the modern Chinese model is a very strong core power in Beijing. And as long as you don't cross those guys, you can have peace. You know, that's the deal. Just fall into line, and you know they'll even be quite accommodating with your little Tibetan kind of little habits and all that sort of stuff. As long as that's underneath, your gods must be underneath the CCP, as far as I can tell. Yeah, have your gods, but as long as your gods and all that sort of stuff, and your religious beliefs and all that sort of stuff, don't interfere with something higher than the gods. Okay, so you can have the Christian God. Okay, there's lots of Christians in China at the moment. You can have but the CCP is higher than that. You know, these are local gods, if you like. You know, the Christian God is a local god. And the Buddhist faith is a local faith, and all that sort of stuff. Okay, and Jewishness and all those sorts of things. All right. Now, it just seems to the Chinese model that we're looking at today, which is relevant, seems to echo what was put in place by the Mongols during their rule in China. So China today seems to me to echo their own one dynasty, and which is not surprising, because you know we Australians echo, you know, the Magna Carta and all that sort of stuff. So you know these things can stuff that happens a long time ago, in the time of King John or Genghis Khan or whatever. You know, that comes forward. It's immediately relevant, even if it's in the 1300s, 1400s, or whatever. Okay, so the Genghis Khan model. Yeah, the phone wants to fall down. That's all right. Maybe we're looking at it, in the form of the CCP. You know, it's not called a dynasty. You know, unless President Xi starts a dynasty. You know, it's called the CCP. It's called the Chinese Communist Party, which is a very different beast. Different from the Soviet Union, the USSR. I don't see it as a properly communist thing, but the CCP, it's kind of, it's, you know, with the Soviet Union, as far as I can tell, the ideology was communism. You know, and that was the end. You know, the be all and the end all was communism as a, you know, and Marxist-Leninist communism as being the world, you know, a model for the world. You know, and they truly believed in that stuff. Most of the commies back in those times, the USSR commies, and the USSR commies kind of exported that across to China, but China co-opted communism, not for the glory of communism, but for the glory of China. And that's a very different thing. You know, Russians didn't take on communism to make Russia glorious. In fact, they tried to bury, you know, Russians themselves tried to bury Russia as an idea. You know, there was no nation of Russia as part of the USSR. The nation was the USSR. The nation was communism, socialism, USSR style, Lenin style. The nation was that whole thing. You didn't have a Russian nation per se, and a Ukrainian nation, and all that sort of stuff. Really, the ideology before World War II, anyway, was for this whole thing to be one nation, and hopefully maybe for that to be the whole world, one nation, with cultures inside it, but one nation. All right, the Chinese, so communism would have been the idea. There could have been a single global world order, communism, collectivism, and all that sort of stuff. All right, the Chinese know. The idea they could, Mao or whatever, could see an opportunity there for communism to work as a Chinese model, not as a communist model, but as a Chinese model. Communism was working for China, but over in Russia and Kazakhstan and Ukraine and all those sorts of places, communism was working for communism. But in China, I think communism is working for China. Now, the model that China's got, just having a chat here and just let me switch leg. Oh my God, one of my legs has gone to sleep because what I do, I do the lotus position thing while I'm driving. Oh damn, that hurt. Yeah, and one leg under. I can actually put two legs under, but that's a bit dangerous because you got nothing anywhere near the brakes then. So I just put one leg over. Get a leg over and, excuse me. Alright. There we go. So, I could have done this in 2 minutes, but I'm just waffling. So the model that Genghis Khan had was this central powerful force that could make the whole world peaceful, with the carrot and stick model. Play by our law, our great law, and you'll have peace all around the world forever. Anyone who steps out of line will slaughter, but that's the road to peace. Compare that to Europe, like you get 1,000 out of every million getting slaughtered horribly. 1,000, only 1,000 out of every million people getting slaughtered absolutely horrendously, as a warning to the other 999,000 people. Okay, you might think that's terrible. It's terrible seeing babies all being skewered, and chopped up in little bits and all that sort of stuff, and in front of their parents. And of course it's terrible, but compare it to Europe, where everyone was living like shit. Instead of 999,000 people living okay, with good trade and all that sort of stuff, and 1,000 getting slaughtered horribly. In Europe, you had just, at least 3/4 of the people living like shit. Not slaughtered that bad, but, a lot more than 1,000 people dying. That's sort of logic, But it's worth, like you talk models for the world, capitalism is one model, and you talk the model the Soviet Union had as another model. I'll put the light on. And what other models have we got? Well, I'm not sure that Marx came up with a model. I think Marx's idea was don't do capitalism. I think that was Marx's sort of message. Don't do capitalism, but he didn't say what to do. And it took someone like Lenin to say, "Oh, I'll take the ideas of, all right, I'm listening to you, Marx, Karl Marx, Lenin, I'm listening to you, Karl Marx. Don't do capitalism. All right, I've got an idea. Let's do Russian-style collectivism/communism, and that way we're doing what you said, Karl Marx. which is don't do capitalism. We're not doing capitalism, so tick. You know, that's what you said, Karl Marx. Don't do capitalism, all right? And we are doing this, you know, Russian-style agrarian collective communism, you know, which is not something that Karl Marx even imagined. You know, Karl Marx thought that any new system that wasn't capitalism that might come about would be, you know, post-capitalism. He didn't think you could put his ideas into an agrarian society. He thought that had to be the product of an industrial. He thought an industrial society. So he thought, all right, the Industrial Revolution brought in capitalism, but that's only step one, and step two will be something beyond that, you know, which will be some sort of socialism, which is what Marx said. But Lenin, he threw a curveball, because he grabbed a society that was still prior to the Industrial Revolution, being Russia and environs, and he kind of turned that socialist. And Marx wouldn't have predicted that, I don't think, from what I've heard. I'm no expert on anything, of course. Marx would have said, no, you'd have to industrialize first, then go to capitalism, and then move on to socialism. You know, but Lenin developed a socialist system for an agrarian society, you know, sort of skipping capitalism altogether. And to a certain, you know, has Marxism, you know, some people say, oh, communism has been tried again and again and again, over and over and over, and it keeps failing. I'm not sure that it has. As far as I can tell, communism has only been tried once, you know, maybe twice. Now, there was a Paris Commune, but that lasted only a little while. You know, I don't know if it was only a couple of weeks or something. It was only in Paris. You know, they had a little communist sort of system going in Paris at one stage in the 1800s. And the Paris Commune, and, you know, the French Revolution was experimenting with all sorts of systems. And they had this little Paris Commune, but it was other revolutionaries smashed it in no time. All right. All right, that was a short-lived technical communism. All right, but then I think the very first communism model that was tried on a large scale was, well, the USSR, Lenin. Okay, that's experiment number one. Now, have we had an experiment number two? Well, technically, China might be a third model. You know, the Paris Commune, then Soviet-style communism, that model. You know, and these are all models that are adhering to Marxism, because Marx said, don't do capitalism. You know, do something beyond capitalism. Don't do capitalism. All right. So, has Marx been tried? How many times has Marx been tried? Well, once, the Paris Commune. Twice, the Soviet Union. Yeah, that was a very, very decent attempt to do Marxism, but not. To do a form of Marxism, which, remember, Marxism is not a political system. It's just a system that says, don't do capitalism, do something better. All right, as far as I know. And number three would be China, which is a form of communism. But I don't think that's a real form of communism, because it's for the glory of China, really, surely, you know. And it's not for the glory of communism, you know, or Marxism or anything like that. I don't think China's got, you know, Marx on its mind. I think it's got China on its mind. You know, oh, it's President Xi. You know, he's not saying, oh, let's do everything. You know, he's not talking about Marx every 5 minutes. He's talking about, you know, the great embarrassment of, you know, what did he call it? The century of insults, or whatever he calls it, you know, and getting over that. He's talking about China. He's not talking about Lenin. All right, so you've got that. You've got, all right, Paris Commune is one attempt at doing Marxism. You've got USSR. I almost wouldn't call China a the third attempt of doing Marxism. Oh yeah, maybe. No, I think it might be capitalism on steroids, actually, China. So I'm not going to count it. Right, I reckon only the USSR has been tried. And then you could say, oh, what about Cuba and North Korea? You know, this is attempt after attempt. And what about Vietnam and Ethiopia and all these other places that tried communism? Well, they were just trying to, you know, be little Russias. You know, do little. They weren't coming up with a new model. They were just offshoot ideas. You know, they were just doing the USSR thing. They were doing the Soviet Union thing. So I don't think that would constitute a third attempt at Marxism. I think Marxism's only really been tried once. I don't think the Paris Commune counts anyway. It's a tiny little thing. Couple of blokes, you know, with baguettes, having coffees, make a Paris Commune. I don't think that really counts. I think the Soviet Union was the only genuine attempt at Marxism. You know, maybe Marxism should be given a second try. But that's just all falling over all the time. You know, you try and be virtuous and not touch the thing. I haven't touched my phone once there, believe it or not. I've touched the lead. I've got a power lead going to the phone. I've touched the lead. You know, could I argue that in court? I haven't touched my phone once. And there's a little white cable coming out of it. I've been touching the cable. I'm going to give you 3 years, might say the magistrate, just for your just because of your insolence, you know, because you shit me. Not for the phone. Just, God, I can't stand your face. All right. Okay. So where is it all relevant? Well, maybe China's putting into place a kind of Genghis Khan model to a certain extent, where it's very, you know, and that might be the model that China's got in place, and to some extent, the Chinese model that we've got today, under the name of CCP, might be a not too distant echo of the Mongolian model. The Chinese nowadays say the Yuan dynasty was part of Chinese history, which it was, but Chinese history at that time was part of the Mongol history because the Mongols were in charge. You know, you can just, define it any way you want. Right. Just as a coda, so to speak, yes, the Mongols even set up shop in Beijing, and this is testament to the fact that the Mongols were happy for locals to live the way they live. Now, the Mongols were nomadic, hunter-gatherer, but pastoral herder. They didn't have any buildings at all. This was bizarre. They took over, you know, imposed their law. They conquered every civilization they could find. So they were in charge of all these great civilizations, even though they lived in tents, you know, yurts, and didn't have any buildings, no structures at all. You know, it wasn't part of their culture. This is like a hunter-gatherer tribe conquering, you know, in the modern era, go to 1788 and flip things around, and Indigenous Australians conquer America, England, France, Italy, and a few other places. Imagine if you flipped it. You know how England took Indigenous Australia over? Well, imagine if it went the other way around. You'd say, how could that be? How could a hunter-gatherer tribe defeat civilizations like France, you know, Germany, Egypt, and all these places back in 1788? You know, how could they do that? Well, something like that happened when it comes to the Mongols. They took Russia, which was a built environment, so it was a civilization under the Greek sort of definition of civilization. And if you want some other definition, well, if you want to speak Greek, we're talking their definition, aren't we? All right. So, but these are built environments like India, China, Russia, Baghdad, and all those sorts of places. Hungary, Poland, Ukraine, if you want to call that a different country these days, and all that sort of stuff. You get this bloody hunter-gatherer, pastoral herder mob with no structures at all, no buildings. They conquer all of this, And here's the thing, even though they did that, they said, listen, we're not going to force you to live like us. You don't have to live in tents. Quarter, when we're going to go set up shop in China, this is what Kublai Khan's said, because the Mongolian Empire sort of split into four, and one of the four parts was the part that had China and then Southeast Asia and almost Japan. That was bad luck. A kamikaze wind blew up and destroyed the Mongol Navy. Chinese Navy? Mongol Navy? What's the difference? Anyway, so they set up shop, Kublai Khan set up shop in Beijing, but, he created this forbidden city where the Chinese weren't allowed in there, because that's where the rulers were. The rulers were the Mongols. And in there, in the forbidden city, was tents, yurts, drinking, what you'd call unsophisticated behaviour, according to when compared to Chinese behaviour, because Chinese were quite all very nice, thank you very much, and how's your mother and all that sort of stuff, quite, lots of, having cups of tea ceremonies and all that sort of stuff. But the Mongol, who were the rulers, I'm just dandying on now, so that's I'll bring the waffle to a halt. But the Mongols inside the Forbidden City was just on, and everyone getting pissed. And these were the rulers, But outside the Forbidden City, so you had the nobility, as you might call it, the Mongol Kublai Khan and his mates, living in tents in the middle of Beijing. But all around was all the, the architecturally delicate, artistic, beautiful Chinese built environment, until you went into where the power was, which is the Mongols, and they're just living in tents in the middle of all that civilization. But that's testament to the fact, I think, that the Mongols said, listen, even though we think, even though we're above you, even though to look at you, you would think that you were above us, because we're living like hunter-gatherers, sort of thing. We're wearing animal skins, we're kind of a little bit partial to eating rats and things like that, Like if a rat comes across the floor, that's us. And you with your little tea parties and all that sort of stuff. All right, we're in charge of you guys. Normally in Europe, the nobility, they're the ones with all the finery. But here in Beijing, the people who were living in a little bit more of a sophisticated way were the people who weren't in charge. And the ones who were in charge, well, they're the guys living in tents in the middle of the, but they walled it off, so we want to live like Mongols still, we want to live the old ways. We don't want to live like you, these little fancy tea parties. We want to, if we see a rat scurry across the floor, we want to grab that thing by the tail and then bite its head off. Yum. Not that bad. They got a little bit sophisticated. They actually liked, they liked some of the finery. They liked silk. Anyway, so I arrived, and that's it really. So the CCP might be a bit like that, and it might be a decent model for the future. I don't know. I'm a bit like Marx. I know what's not working. I don't know what would. Marx said capitalism's no good, and so he said come up with something else, and no one actually has come up with something good yet. Marx, a bit of a cheat really. Capitalism is shit. come up with something better. That's Marxism. Oh, he had a lot of philosophy to go along with it. A bit of a cheat, you know, because you can always say, oh, well, it just hasn't been done properly yet. It's only really been tried once. You know, Marxism has only been tried once. According to my argument earlier, I was being a little bit tricky there. What would be an analogy, by the way, and this is just to finish off, because I've arrived at the factory to watch some footy, what would be an analogy to this business of the Khans living in tents while the lesser peoples that they were in control of lived in a more sophisticated way? And I think that would be a little bit the Romans, not that there's any real comparison between the Romans and the Mongolians. Roman Empire, Mongolian Empire, probably the two biggest. The Romans, though, did have one cute little thing, you know. They wouldn't call themselves, the Roman Republic I'm talking about, they wouldn't call themselves kings, you know, and they wouldn't wear gold crowns and all that sort of stuff. A little bit of a purple trimming on their toga, and that's about as much as they would go for. But the point is, they'd be in charge, the Romans, Roman Republic, and but in their client states, you know, the ones who were sort of subservient to them, they would have kings, you know. So the Jews, you would have King Herod, you know, but King Herod kind of reported to the Romans, who didn't have a king. So the king was underneath a higher authority, being the Romans, and the ruler of the Romans wore no crown, or if he did, it was just a grass crown. You know, like maybe the laurel or something. Not much. You know, they didn't go in for that kingly. They wanted to be virtuous. So, you know, flashy displays of gold and all that sort of stuff like Nebuchadnezzar or anything like that. They thought that was low class. No, they thought it was unvirtuous. You know, having these great kings and all that sort of stuff, Middle East style. The Romans weren't into that. So the higher authority was kind of living poor. You know, not poor, but the higher authority was living without virtuous looking. They were living virtuous looking. And the Romans were a bit like that. And the Mongols were a bit like that too. Mongols didn't mind silks. They did like that. And that'll do. I'm here. What was all that about? Oh yeah. You know, all that was about saying, is Genghis Khan relevant today? And if he is it because China's model today, you know, does it have echoes of what Genghis Khan was all about? That's what I was getting at.